some guy comment to say, well, it's just really a freelance consultant. It's like, yeah, that's exactly what a fractional CTO is. Exactly free, but it's just the word freelance consulting is so broad and generic. We're just trying to make it easier for people.
Like, we're in a climate right now where your employees of your business are very unlikely to tell you what you need to hear, because if your business is struggling, they're not going to want to put themselves on the chopping block. Whereas people like you and I, we don't give a shit, right? We'll find another. If you don't like what you hear and you get rid of us and you sack us, we'll find another gig. It's not the end of the world.
You need to have a certain amount of focus to get any one thing done. And if you have 10 things that are equal priority, that doesn't mean you even do 10% of 10 things. It really just means you do nothing.
Yeah. So we're catching up because of the new thing that we're teaming up on. We've partnered on and offering.
I had 2 bookings.
Yeah, already had 2 people come in to book a pro bono session with us, which was pretty cool. So I guess, we want to talk about it to, I guess, explain our thought process behind it, right? Like, what was it that attracted you to the idea initially of working together to do like a joint pro bono session?
It started
aside from my wonderful face, that's
what convinced me to do it. You said you should do this, and I thought that's a good idea. Well, I guess we talked about this a little bit last time, but I keep finding myself talking to people and saying, look, you need to speak to a commercial advisor. I'm having a sort of kind of have calibratory, if that's a word, calibrating conversations with people, with founders who, have ideas, or, and they're in various stages of those ideas. Some of these people have gone already and, engaged with developers, hired developers, had things built that just didn't really match what they really were looking for. And others are just in that sort of ideation phase. They've mapped it all out and they've created a beautiful design of every step of how their app's going to look. And, they can outline the UX perfectly, but they don't really know whether there's a market fit for that. They haven't really found a way of like, well, who are your customers going to be? What do they think about this? What features do they actually value? Is there a level of validation in that what you're proposing will actually solve a problem? And because my approach with these people often is like, no, let's not go and build something. No, I'm not going to build what you've asked me to do, because that's not what I do. I can and do build for people, but I'm not just taking a set of requirements, and I'm trying to help people be successful because I want to be part of wins. Basically, one thing I have in my head is like, I'm not trying to make a couple of $100 from you now. I want to make $1 million from you in a few years. Is kind of where my mentality is.
Because you're making hundreds of billions, like
right, exactly. Not because I've scammed you out of all your money and taken $1 million, but because the small slice of my pie from that would obviously $1 million's a big number, right? And it's just more of a token amount to say, but I keep finding myself anyway putting people through to you. They've not come to me for that reason. They've come to me from a technology perspective, but I felt like there's a lot of calibration to reality that needs to be done with people. And so I passed them to you more regularly. And then we had the chat, and I think you had talked about how, you're often saying to people, you need to go find the tech guy now who can, who can go and sort of help you build out and shape an MVP. And then I guess, to me, it made perfect sense then when you suggested that as an idea that we collaborate on this, that, like, why not? Like, I think it solidifies that message a little bit more as well, rather than hearing sort of either slightly different version of the story or very different other version of the story from different professionals. And so I thought it would be a cool thing to try out.
And you're right. Like, I definitely have had the same sort of thing, but on the other side of the fence, where and I think we spoke about this before, where I talk about the sort of disconnect that there is often between a lot of consultants and advisors and so on. And as someone who wants to just start a business, they've got an idea, they speak to people online, and it's all very isolated, this advice. And what frustrates me about that is that actually the conversation, especially on the tech piece side of things, is directly related to the discussion around the commercialization of the product, right? Like, so like you were talking about there, like building an MVP, have they got, done some product market, evaluation? Have they spoke to people and so on? Like all of that commercial piece that I talk about, like, you need to have someone there, from my perspective, in some of these discussions with a tech background like yourself, to be able to say, well, okay, in that case, we can do this, we can build that. Like, actually, it really affects the build significantly, obviously, like in the same reasons why you would, quite often pass them on to me before speaking to you. But in some cases, I find that actually having those conversations together, and I guess we're going to find out with these more ones coming up, but that actually that it can really simplify the overall plan. And this is the bigger thing for me, is how over complicated and overwhelming I think sometimes the idea of starting a business can be, when especially you look online and it's like, oh, well, you need to have this plan, you need to have this plan, you need to have this plan. And yes, there's a lot of things to consider, but actually when you have two people who are on the same page, who understand the tech and the commercial side, they can just say, all you got to do is this first, actually, let's just do this first. And because there's a synergy there, it makes it a bit more black and white. I feel like that's where I really want to get to with this. It's just making people feel more comfortable with taking that first step, because they know that there are two people who have got their back, they've got the fundamentals covered, of commercial, how to take something to market, or how to build a community, or how to validate their idea or get feedback or whatever, and how to implement that into a product in a meaningful way in a cost-effective way too. And that's sort of the angle that I was coming from it. I think I may have expressed that better to you the first time we spoke.
No, I think
probably the second time around. But
I think it gives people more of a tangible first step. When you've had that sort of two sides to the coin, and I think what it probably does is narrows down your realistic first steps to take. And in a very simplistic sense, that could just be, what is the absolute minimum version of this, which could just be like surveying, provide some value maybe, but sort of surveying your users, and do that in a very simplistic technology way, and start to add to what you know about this product, what you know about what the market is, and start to just learn more. There's so many unknowns in this process. Like, you literally don't know anything. And I'm always surprised by people's determination to focus so much on like an app as part of the building of a business. I'm a tech guy, right? And that's what I'm doing for people. But I'm really, really surprised that I get people come to me who have like no tech backgrounds, very limited tech experience. But not only do they want to build an app, they've gone and spoken to like 10 different people, reached out to developers and agencies everywhere, and just sort of hit them again with this like set of requirements, with this user journey that they see have happen. They've gone to all this effort. And I had this very recently, I'll be careful of what I say, but they work in an industry where they perceive there is a great opportunity to use AI to make people's lives easier in the fulfillment of their job. They have a complex job that requires a lot of stored up knowledge, but that knowledge is all available out there. It's just not very easily to Google. You're not going to get it from ChatGPT. But I was shocked by the amount of effort they'd gone to go and speak to 10 different tech people, and they hadn't at any point gone and spoken to their peers, gone and spoken to other people in the industry, just drawing some on a piece of paper and said, well, how would this help you? What would you say? Is this what you want? Yeah. Right. And, and this is where I did refer those individuals to you as well, because I said, look, this is actually going to cost you a lot of money. This could cost you maybe 100,000 when you really think about not just the tech side of it, the training of models, the gathering the information, the people you'll need to train those models, then your marketing side of it as well. You could be talking about 100K sunk cost. Have you even thought about what you would need to charge users in order to make that profitable? As it's not, we think about Netflix, people will only pay $7, $8, $9, $10 a month for a product because they have Netflix as a reference point, but you can't make any money at that price point unless you have 1 million customers. And so how long are you willing to lose another 100K a year or more to fill out your idea? And you can see the sort of shock in people's faces. And I'm like, this isn't even my job to tell you about this. I should just be sat here going, yeah, okay, I'll take your money. But again, it's not really what I want to do in this moment. And
it's not how you want to operate. It's like, Yeah, it's like we talked about, neither of us want to operate in that sort of slightly gray ethical area of just like, oh, that's your idea? Okay, yeah, well, we'll do it. You know, like we want to work, give the advice that we can sleep soundly on at the end of the day. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah,
I make a million.
yeah. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's the balance though, is I suppose giving advice in a way that that doesn't also sort of make what's the word I'm looking for? It doesn't necessarily shit on people's ideas basically too much. Like, you know, but the app thing is a really good example of the amount of people that I speak to. They're like, oh yeah, they envisage it being an app and they want it to be an app. Like there's a few companies out there, or a few individuals or business ideas or whatever you want to say that I've spoken to out there over the years where, you know, there are some things that just need to be, given the industry that they're in, the speciality or whatever, it needs to skip the MVP stage, right? It needs to go to that sort of level. But 99.9% of the time, you know, whatever you're thinking, it can be a website first. You know, it could be a jot form first. It could be a fucking Excel spreadsheet first. Like, there's a lot of things it can be before it needs to be that. Because like you said, you just need to prove that people, like more than anything else, you need to prove that people actually want something. Like the people you were speaking about just a moment ago that you passed on over to me, you know, a good bit of advice I gave, well, I hope it was a good bit of advice I gave there, was to talk about, funny enough, I used the Netflix example as well. And I said, you know, why is it that you pay for your Netflix? Do you feel that, you know, how much do you pay? You know, 15 quid or whatever a month. Okay. Do you feel you get £15 worth of value every month from that? More. So exactly. So it needs to be a minimum of about 5 times the value that you're spending, really, for justifying people to give you their money. And so if it's not that, then don't even think about it, right? So like you said, if it's going to cost you 100K to build the bloody thing, then yeah, how are you going to justify charging people 5 times that, you know? So, and Netflix don't even make any bloody money anyway, so they're not really a good example.
Oh, right, and that's it. There are on this sort of type of business that are making money on the idea that they'll make more money in the future, and it's this sort of this tech bubble of investment over the last 10 years has been about them. Amazon didn't make any money for years and years.
Yeah. Uber, Airbnb, you know, I mean, the list goes on. Yeah.
And they're not the apps to base yourself on, really. But you know, there's a few other things that I think people don't realize about why that's an important step to go through. This sort of iterative, take some steps forward and learn about it. And I think it's largely because, again, of that inexperience of the tech world. And I come from a data engineering background, and so I think what's useful about that world is that if you're wrong, you are proven wrong very, very quickly. You know, if you build things that do not serve the purpose that they were intended for, they do not meet your customers' needs. And again, your customers don't know what they actually need. They have some ideas of what they want. Your job to, you know, decipher that in the middle. But it's a very instantaneous feedback loop when you're working with, you know, thousands of data sets and millions of records. It's tangible what you can get wrong. But when you approach a situation like that, you try and start on the most fundamental, basic levels that you can. You really try and build from the ground up. And that can be as simple in a data engineering context would be, what are the customers that we're talking about? How I'm doing this for a bank. They have lots of different customers on lots of different account situations, you know, income brackets or products or whatever that might be. And that's actually an amazingly difficult task for a lot of organizations to actually, you know, put a circle around who are we actually talking about here. And when you then look at that set of customers, you can then say, oh, well, actually their needs already, by just taking this subset, have a realization that their needs are actually quite different and maybe require different solutions. And you're essentially playing this game of trying to discover what you need to know. And that's why the iterative approach works, because you think that you want to build an app that does X, Y, Z, but it's such a high level view. There are, for every sort of user experience decision you make, there are probably 10 different consequences of that you haven't thought about. And that makes building applications or building software very expensive if you build them or build something first and have to walk all the way back to accommodate for all those things you learned afterwards. And so you're trying to help,
which is the old school way of doing it.
Right. Yeah, for sure. That is how things used to be a lot more. And that can still be the case. You know, I worked on a lot of projects where we would have to build something where it was a new product, and it was, so there was no data, and you are being much more speculative. And they were always the most difficult ones, because always things would happen that you didn't expect to. So you would build this system. This is going to happen. People would tell you, this is what you're going to get. It's going to look like this. Third-party suppliers are telling you, yeah, you'll get this from us this day. And then they don't give it on that day. And it doesn't look like that. And your customers behave in a different way. And they press buttons in places that you'd never thought about. And that is extremely, extremely costly, particularly when you've already gone and built the whole thing. It's like, imagine building a mansion, and then going in afterwards and doing your plumbing and doing your electrics.
Yeah.
Like, it's going to be really, really costly for you to have to rip down all those walls every time. And so that's why it's better to think about, okay, let's put the foundations down. Now we've got the foundations down. Like, where are those walls going to go? And how should we do the electrics and the plumbing in conjunction with that? Rather than just sort of drawing a house, and going, right, go ahead and build it.
And that's exactly where the commercial side of things comes in, right? And that's where there's that meeting of the two, like I was talking about earlier, like it makes sense for me that two people on both ends of that are able to sit down and plot that out with a founder or a set of founders from the beginning. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Like, there's very few occasions where someone, like, if someone's building the new Amazon, like, when he built Amazon, he probably, had a very clear vision for what that was. No one had done that before. So yeah, you're going to take a bit of a gamble there, right? You're going to throw a bit more money at that. You're going to build something no one else has built, and you're going to go for it. And of course it would, but it's what people forget about that is, although it was still a huge gamble and it was a huge push into a very specific direction, it was still only selling books, right? Yeah. So there was still an iterative process then. Bezos always wanted to make it what it is now. He always had that vision. And this is just one of many examples you can look at of these big, what's the word I'm looking for? Disruptive advancements in commerce or tech. But he always had that vision. But he knew that, yes, it's a huge gamble to create an online bookstore. Essentially, it had never been done before. Just like looking at Netflix doing DVD delivery, never been done before, right? But the point is, that's where they started. They didn't go straight to building Netflix for streaming. Like, no fucking way. Amazon didn't go straight to, let's have a place where anyone can sell anything, and we're gonna we'll set up distribution centers all over the country and do next day delivery. Like, that can't happen. That there has to be a process to get there. So even the big players, yes, they took bigger risks, and yes, they went out and built these pretty expensive platforms from the off. But not many other businesses, at least the ones I'm really speaking to, fit that sort of mold where they need to be bold and first to the punch and all that kind of thing. There's very few that fit that. And if they are, you recognize them and you say, okay, yeah, you need to spend a couple $100,000 on this, and let's get going. And if you've got the money, get investors, whatever. Yeah,
you have to have the people with the right backing. The investors, the people with the money, and also the people who are playing a game that is more or less, okay, I have 10 million in the bank, and I'm going to chuck that at 20 different projects, and the hope is that one or two of those projects 100x. That's the game they're playing. The people who do those sorts of things are in that game, and most people just aren't in that game.
Of course,
period, right? But they're using it as a benchmark. They use the Netflix, the Amazon stories, without taking into context that we were also going through this huge technological shift in the world, where there was all these open available options, and like cryptocurrency sort of is and has and will go through that as an example, because the Web3 concept basically means that, well, every good idea that is out there on the internet right now could be turned into a Web3 idea, and everyone could make loads of money on it. And so you are starting to get, especially with AI, starting to get into these kind of territories again, where there might be possible for huge companies like the Netflix, the Amazons to grow and to completely disrupt an industry, but they're probably still not going to do it. To your point about Amazon selling books, they're still not going to achieve that with this grandiose plan and hitting it all straight on the head. And I think part of it is also about, you learn about what opportunities you have, as you go through that process. Like in banking, they have this term called cross-product holdings, which is about basically how many different products your customers have. Because for banks, mostly for savings accounts and current accounts, the banks are losing money, on everybody. They lost leading products. And so for those industries, it's all about how do we get you a credit card? How do we get you a loan? How do we sell you insurance as well? And I think that there's a lot of people who miss the possibility of, okay, you think you've got an industry that there's a problem in, you think you can solve that. So back to the example I mentioned before, they also had an idea. They said, oh, well, it's actually really difficult for people in our profession. When we travel to these different places, we need help. We need other professionals in that industry, but there's just no way to find it. You have to just, go on to like Craigslist, if you like, or go on to Fiverr and, go on to these different types of communities or find agencies in that city. And it's a real nightmare. And I was like, you shouldn't be thinking about this AI idea right now. Like, focus on build a community, build a platform that can make people's lives easier because you see a problem and it's going to be really easy to do that cheaply. And you don't even need to monetize it so much because guess what? They would be your customer base of the product that you have. And often what I say to people is like, what is the minimum amount of value you can add? Like, and maybe as we need to change that MVP mentality, it's like minimum value add product that you can give to people to actually find who your customers are, to engage with them, to get them on your mailing list, to be able to talk to them and get their feedback, and then sell to them afterwards. Because let's be real, marketing is a huge, huge thing here. If you don't have marketing, if you're not spending money on marketing, the likelihood that you're going to be going to sell your product drops dramatically. It can be done without marketing for sure, but look at the Barbie movie. They spent more money on advertising than they did making the film.
Yeah, and a community-led go-to-market approach is one that I am a massive advocate for in software. Like, it's something I've been saying for many years, and it's good to see that it's now coming to fruition. More and more companies or startups are doing it, but it's been borrowed from the gaming industry effectively. In this idea of building in public almost, sort of releasing an alpha, then a beta, and bringing people in, closed and then open, and getting their feedback and improving and iterating and making the user base not only sort of baked in before you even start selling it, so there's an audience there ready to hand over their money for something, but they're even more likely to hand over their money for something that they've been part of building. They've been part of that process, and it's a genius way of doing something, and it tackles that exact problem you mentioned of how incredibly expensive marketing can be, and it's just not possible for most founders to be able to free up any budget on marketing, and so it and likewise on sales, because of sales and marketing, two sides of the same coin, hugely expensive, very difficult to find competent people in both areas, I would say, because there's a lot of people in sales and marketing that just unfortunately aren't as competent as they say they are. I know that, having hired hundreds in both, right? But that's not necessarily their fault. It's because of quite often, there's a lot of nuance depending on the products and depending on the industry, and every year or every month it seems the approach changes. So you're doing yourself a disservice, I think, in this day and age if you're not building in that way, because of actually starting a company like that creates a momentum and a network effect in your own community that sets you up to essentially, if you have a community of, let's say, 10,000 people all ready to buy your product, and they've helped build it over the course of 2 years, you put any mediocre sales or marketing person in the post with that opportunity, and it's you're setting them up to win very, very easily, as well as your company. So it's a no-brainer for me, and it's a very simple thing to do. I give the advice very often about when it comes to social media, as well as, like, there's a few things I always say. Like, one is you don't need an app. Two is you don't need to use social media, right? You just don't. It's a huge time sink. If you're going to use any social media, then use it to build a community. Not to promote your product. It's a waste of time. You don't need to, to have an Instagram account like Amazon or Tesla, right? You're not that, Instead, all of that time and energy that you would be placing in activity like that, which can be incredibly an incredible time sink, should be put into community building, going on Reddit, finding people, offering free advice, creating content that's useful on LinkedIn to adopt people into your Slack group or Discord or whatever. Like, that is far more valuable than trying to come up with a brand before you've even launched, or do you know what I mean? Like that, those kinds of things. So yeah, not always. There obviously, again, there are some exceptions to that. Like obviously, you know, like a great example. I spoke to a lady. I can't reveal too much about it, but she's yet to launch. But who's absolutely, you know, skipped past the MVP stage. She's going into a very heavily regulated industry that wouldn't take anyone seriously unless, you know, the product was, you know, to a certain standard. And in that case, that's different. But you know, she's going the route of, you know, raising, you know, tens of millions of pounds of investment and building something to a very, very high standard, recruiting marketing experts, branding experts, PR experts. Like that's a very different approach, but that's not everyone, you know, very few people fit that situation, very few.
Exactly. And I think we are probably, you know, aiming towards this, you know, solopreneur, if you like. And I don't just mean individuals on their own, but this, I guess that's more almost like a meme of the idea of, you know, Joe Blogs deciding to set up his own business now. You know, people are tired of the corporate world. They're tired of living a life where like they can't even say what they want to on social media, or like, you know, I have friends and ex-colleagues, people who are like, yeah, well, I can't even like something you say on LinkedIn because it's going to show people that I liked it, and like you used to work here and you don't work here, and I'm worried that that will be perceived wrong. And I'm like, wow, it's like we're in Orwell's 1984 here. And I think I've got
in trouble with previous employers because of what I've posted on LinkedIn and stuff. It's ridiculous, like absolutely. Yeah, but it's yeah, you're right. We are, I suppose, our offering of kind of this joint pro bono thing it appeals more towards those sort of individuals. But it's worth pointing out again that what I said about Jeff Bezos, you know, creating an online bookshop. Like if someone was to come now with an equivalent idea, which the majority of the ideas are, they're not like these hugely disruptive things. They're just like, I want to create this and it serves a very niche market. That's not to say that the commercial opportunities don't suddenly open up in future if they are able to create success in this one thing that they're creating. And more often than not, a lot of the conversations I have with people are, you know, we talk about stripping it back and going there, but then saying, but then I like to end with, there are things you can do here as well. You know, if you're able to hit this and this, you know, target or whatever over the next 3-5 years, you could. There's no reason you couldn't pivot into this direction or add this an additional service and this, because I think it's still worth as well, not just knocking people, you know, down for their expectations, but also to let them know that if you execute this one thing really fucking well, like once you have those foundations and that security, then you can, you know, the world's your oyster. You can build on that. You can add additional services. You can really, you know, build a company that can be quite disruptive from there. But you need to sometimes strip back the idea first. And the biggest thing, and this is something I forgot to mention earlier, the biggest thing for me about all of this is about people's health and emotional and financial well-being. That's what concerns me more than anything else. When people get, you know, into like that mindset you said of being prepared sometimes to take out, you know, a huge amount of money or loans or get into debt in order to build something very expensive because they're working with an organization or advisors or whatever that don't have this same approach, or maybe don't. And that's not to say everyone does, but you know, that we know that there are those out there that would just very happy to take the 10K and build it without any thought to the things we're talking about. And that terrifies me. Or they don't have someone around them that can just say it's a shit idea. Like that too. You know what I mean? Like
yeah, for sure.
And that
I think there's something in the middle of it too. You know, there's always middle ground from here, and I think certainly what I see on the technical side of it, and this is a sort of echoing conversation I had in my previous career, my previous life anyway, from, you know, teams just not delivering what's expected of them. And there's this idea, you know, it's just hard to find bad developers. And really what it comes down to is communication. Comes down to how you're articulating your idea, how you're putting the right framework in place, the approach you're taking. And certainly what I've seen with talking to founders who have gone off and hired a dev, they found somebody on Fiverr, or they've, you know, gone to university and got some students to help them, is actually quite complicated to be able to take an idea and to dissect that into a technical roadmap and to then set up a framework that enables developers to be successful, for them to report on their findings, for them to document what they're assuming in this process. And this is a big thing, you know, assumptions, assuming that something will be the case and then kind of forgetting you assumed that, and then wondering why everything breaks or goes to shit afterwards when those assumptions are silently broken. And I think this is a huge, huge pitfall, certainly, that I'm trying to help people in this space as well. Is, okay, well, maybe I'm not the person who's going to actually build the thing for you, but I can certainly help you manage the developers, manage their roadmap. Because, you know, if you don't have a tech background, I promise you, you don't know how to do this.
Yeah,
like, you really have to be some kind of special person to have just figured out now how to get smart people with smart ideas who know and speak languages that you don't, because every single time you try and challenge them on something, they're going to win that argument, or they're going to shut up. And like, both of those things are really, really bad. Like, I saw this earlier in the year with a company that was doing very, very well, earning 50 to 60,000 a month, top line, a mental health app, basically, doing pretty well. And the CEO was determined to move from this paid model where the users were paying a fee per course, and that was a sliding scale. The users could actually change the amount they paid down to quite a low amount to a higher amount. And they actually had no idea where the customers were coming from, or how they were really making money. The whole system was a mess. And the CEO was determined they wanted a subscription model, for one. And I was like, why? Like, why do you want to morph what you have, which is working and earning you really good money, and you don't even know why? Why do you want to turn that into a subscription model in the first place? Like, build something new, sure, try it out, don't break this. But also, to that extent of, like, sort of the other extreme of it around, like, not listening, they just wouldn't listen to their developer. You could see it was a problem. And in that meeting, the developer called out, like, look, I think we have a real problem here, that our customer database is basically at risk. There's some, you know, backups we haven't got, some frameworks in place that just aren't in place. It's very manual. And if this goes wrong, this will be a huge problem for us. And, you know, we just may not even be able to recover it. And I saw the CEO basically belittle the developer, say, what language are you even talking? Talk English to me. You know, these kinds of things. And immediately afterwards, I suggested to the CEO, who was basically saying to me, the developer doesn't know how to develop. And I was saying, well, maybe we should look at communication. You know, how you set tasks, how we agree on what's going to be delivered, what the risks are. She got very, very upset about that, about my suggestion that communication was a problem. 2 or 3 weeks later, during an upgrade, they had that problem that the developer warned them about, and it was catastrophic, and they lost hundreds of customers, at least thousands of customers couldn't log in.
And I bet that developer got blamed for it.
Yeah, for sure. That was followed up with further, like, saying it's just not up to it, just can't do the job. And I was like,
he's the one that pointed it out.
He warned you about this. Yeah, and I spoke to him at length afterwards about the situation, and I tried to bridge that gap. And then that person was particularly rude to me, and so I was like, okay, you know, good luck. And yeah, then that happened, and I believe they may have even had to migrate to a different platform. Who have gone and partnered with some other company to get their content onto a different platform. I think they may have fired that developer, I don't know. But yeah, real shame. And you know, the joke of it all, I came into that whole thing because I saw they were doing it, and I said, well, you know, I don't have the technical skills to build what you're doing or what you've built your app in. But, you know, I'm not really sure you need to worry about those technical skills so much. And the app, I could have built it in a no code. I could have built the whole app in a no code tool inside a week. But they were like super focused on finding developers who could use this specific tool set and had this specific experience, because that's what their current app was, you know, completely built in. But it was hugely over engineered because it was built by the founder and the founder's family, and then just kind of cobbled and moved on. And it's this kind of situation where that's why you talk to someone like me on the technical side, or why you might talk to someone like you on the commercial side, is that we have a breadth of experience that can point out things that you're not even thinking about, that you're not going to get if you work with a 2-3 year experienced individual. They may have energy, they may be capable, they may be able to do all kinds of crazy things, but you also want to have some conversations, at least, with people who have seen a lot of different situations and can understand the broader context. Because whenever you're running a project, a business, whatever it is, you're in the weeds, you're in the woods. You can't see beyond what you are blinkered into. And I think that hopefully what we're going to do here as well is not just for founders. I don't know whether it could also be pitched at functioning businesses. Say, hey, like maybe you could have a chat. We could do some chats about what you're doing, what your plans are, what your ambitions, what your problems even are. And worst case scenario, you come away from the situation with some different ideas and perspectives. And I think that joined up element to it as well, though, that combination between a commercial mentality and a technical mentality, I think could be really powerful, because individually they're important, but they can be at odds with each other. They can be things that really conflict in some people's minds.
And they very often are, like in functioning operational businesses. That's very often the case. And at the end of the day, the technical aspect is the product. It's what is being sold to people, and the disconnect between those on the front line usually selling and the board of directors and their perception of their commercial strategy and the product are huge. It's usually a massive chasm. But you said something really interesting there about communication. Like, I am at a point now where, as you know, I'm about to come out of stealth with my B2B SaaS platform, and that's working with developers, putting together a very strict protocol of ways of communicating, and working on sprints and drip feeding different features, and testing and all of that sort of stuff. I would have not been comfortable. I'm glad I'm doing this now, and I hadn't started doing this, say, 5 years ago, because of although I thought at that time probably I could have done it, I'm glad I didn't, because it's all the experience in the last 10, 15 years, having worked in companies very closely with development teams and working with engineering leaders and all that sort of thing as a CCO and as an advisor, that has let me develop that skill set where I believe I can do it now. And even now I'm still learning all the times of ways to optimize that communication and to improve it, and mistakes happen and miscommunication happens all the time. Things get missed, things go wrong, things break, and so even after 10, 15 years of experience in doing that, it's still a struggle. And I don't know anyone that doesn't struggle with that, because like you said, communicating an idea to a technical team, especially if the technical team is its language isn't first language isn't English as well, which is often the case, and you're working with people distributed around the world, different time zones, different languages, that adds another layer of it too, which is very common. So the fact that you provide that additional support too, like, maybe following, if anyone was to continue wanting to work with either one of us or both of us, following a pro bono session, like that's a hugely valuable thing to be able to provide, because of getting something built is one thing, but or just submitting the project to a team to get it built is one thing, but actually having the know-how and the knowledge of how to effectively project manage that is an entirely different thing. And let's face it, like, developers and pretty much anyone else speak very different languages. Forgetting the language barrier thing, like, there's an entirely different language that's spoken in a lot of different teams. Sales is just the same, marketing is just the same. Like, communicating with different people who have very different specializations is a skill. And actually, one of the things that I pride myself on working with founders, which clearly you do too, which is definitely why we're aligned in so many areas, is not just giving them the sort of roadmap on how to make a successful business, but also how to improve on certain skills that are going to be vital for being a well-rounded leader and a founder more than anything else. And as a founder or a CEO in a company, your skill set has to be very broad, very, very broad. And you need to continuously be developing that skill set, because as the business grows, so too does the demands on your skill set. And the focus is on your skill set. What you need at the beginning is very generalized, and as time goes on, it becomes very focused. I know founders, for example, and CEOs who have got very bored after they've become successful, because actually they preferred it when they were generalists, and that they had to be pulled in different directions. And then when they realized actually that the job of CEO is essentially to continuously manage fundraising and to sit in to sit in a boardroom every fucking day, they were like, this is boring. I wanted to, I like the hustle and bustle of, needing to make calls and get in touch with suppliers and manage this team, and you know what I mean, and speak to customers, and like that's what they wanted. So they would leave, sell their shares, and go and start another business and do it all over again.
Yeah, that sounds quite fun in a lot of ways. But I think you're right. You kind of hit on a few things there with that kind of pull to be a generalist and the desire to be in the thick of things, being essential in a lot of ways. But then it can be problematic for people at a certain point because you do at a certain stage need some specialists to help you with things that you don't know about. And in my head, I have this kind of example of like almost like a football club. You could have a chairman, owner of the football club who might be a wonderful businessman, the most successful business person there could be. Don't just sign 20 players and then be like, right, guys, good luck, we'll go win. That's not what they do. They hire a football manager, a coach, and even that football manager, he has the goalkeeper coaches, he has the defensive coaches, offensive coaches in there working with those teams and being like the glue between all of those people and giving that specialist training and knowledge. And that is obviously not always the case and not always required early on in a startup. But when you are getting to the point that you are hiring people to do things that you don't understand, you've got a problem. You've got a real problem at that point. And that may work well for you to a certain extent, but after a while, it's definitely going to start costing you more money than it saves you. And again, I think this is another thing for you and I in this. I made the comment on your post the other day about like actually saving money here for people is a huge thing for us. If we come to you and you're thinking about spending 10 grand on an MVP, when we're like, well, actually, you know what, you could spend $500, do some surveys, or build this little simple thing, use Airtable or whatever, just to grab some details from people, make a few phone calls, and you're going to learn so much that's then going to be even applicable in, say, being more specific about what you need to build. That's going to save you money. If you've got a team of developers, but you are not a technical person, like, I'm going to save you money on development time because we're going to get to the point that things are delivered more quickly, because you see it all the time, particularly from non-technical leaders, but some technical leaders too. They don't realize that every time they come and say, I want this, that they're developers who are typically more literal people. I'm typecasting, but it's true, right? Typically more literal people, typically more reserved people. And I get this all the time. I used to have this all the time managing consultants. People would be so stressed. I've been asked to do this, and then I've been asked to do that, and they want this doing, they want this requirement. It all seems unnecessary. And my first question is always, well, have you said any of that? Well, no, because I'm and this and that. And it's like, yeah, you're scared, right? And you're not going to say, you're not going to commit, you're not going to convey your fears. You're not going to say, hey, this is all too much. You just keep saying yes. But actually, it's your job is to say no. A product manager or a CEO or whoever, it's their job to ask of people. And it is also their job to, protect as well, for sure. But developers are not very good at that pushback. They're not very good at prioritization, especially if they haven't been given the structure to do so. And what that means is if you've got too many conflicting priorities, you do nothing. You achieve nothing. It's pretty obvious. I hope you use
I recently just rewatched that movie, so it's fresh in my mind.
I think so. I definitely see a post coming about this. That is the big challenge. That is the big thing that I talked when I mentioned before around leaders communicating to tech, and it would always be something I talk to consultants about. And it's getting quite cliched. Is that your customers, your product owners, your CEO, they know what they want. They don't know what they need. And that's what you pay someone like us to come and do, is to help you figure out. And that isn't even like 100% of what you need either. That's like, I just helped you figure out a little bit more of what you need than you had before. Like, take that marginal gain and let's move on. I don't mean that in like, I just help you get 1% and then walk out the door, but like, it's not a magic wand. What we're doing here isn't, being a fractional CTO, this doesn't mean that you get a full-time CTO in all the plus points of having somebody who actually is in your business, who actually is there for the long term. You don't get all of that. no, there is a compromise for things for people. And, for me, that could be as simple, again, it's a language thing. It's helping people understand what game we're playing here. And for me, I see that in the phase of, you've got some ideas, you've got startup ideas. I'm going to help you get from 0 to 1 there. I'm going to help you make that step. And then maybe I'm not the right guy. Maybe I'm then the guy to help you find your actual CTO.
Yeah, maybe it's exactly the same approach I take. Exactly the same. Yeah. Yeah.
Because then I am out. And then maybe down the line, you've need some help with, you're hiring a big engineering team and you need some people to help you get more hires to the door, to help your actual CTO do that, because he's trying to be CTO of the business. And I do think that is probably one of the slight challenges we have when we use the term fractional CTO. My partner said this to me. It's like, well, the problem you have is that most of your potential target audience, if you like, they have a CTO. They don't need a fractional, so not in their mind anyway. And I think that is probably one of the downsides of that term, is that actually we're not necessarily always there to be your actual CTO. It's metaphoric. It's metaphoric of, like, you're bringing in somebody who's experienced, and you have the luxury of only having to pay for their time by the hour or whatever it is, rather than take the big salary. Because I come from a world where, like, you work pretty hard all day, every day. I did 60 hours a week for, like, most of that 15-year career. I don't care what people say about startups, man. Nobody knows how to work. Nobody works that hard from what I've seen in the startup world. Not compared to working in banking. You should go work in banking for a year if you want to understand what hard work is like. Maybe you're a bit like a duck, just like peddling, water underneath and not getting anywhere possibly, but it's bloody hard work. You don't need 5 days of my time. Like, you really don't need 5 days of my time. And that's what pushed me down this route in the end. I took a few, projects and some contracts with companies that they just expectations of what would be done in the hours were embarrassing. And I thought I could have 5 of these jobs easily. And then I guess that's what led me to the fractional idea in the end.
Yeah.
What led you to, what made you decide that this was it, the fractional thing for you?
Very similar, very, very similar. It was this idea that on both ends of the scale. So the big one for me was kind of this idea that there are individuals out there at the very early stages who want to start a business, and that are overwhelmed by the potential cost that's associated with starting a business, or the lack of time. Just feeling like there just is no possibility of doing it, and there not being really any advisors out there or fractionals out there that are accessible, because they're usually priced out, right? That they only take contracts at a minimum of, like, 10K a month or whatever it might be, and that made me a bit sick to the stomach. But then the other side of it was working with existing businesses, very similar to you. This idea that there's so many organizations that really, more often than not, can't see the forest for the trees. And that's at no fault of anyone in the organization, especially, like you said, they usually have a revenue leader there. They might have a CRO, a CGO, a CCO already in post. It's more the case that, sometimes these individuals have been in post for a very long time, maybe since the beginning, and it's very difficult for them to think of maybe how to pivot, how to make things leaner, how to introduce a new product line or something like that, because they're very much stuck in a very specific way of doing things. And sometimes it takes, what I found over the years doing consulting work was it takes a very unique approach, and sort of rebranding that, I guess, or thinking more about doing it as a fractional CCO as opposed to a management consultant seemed to work because of all the reasons you just pointed out. The same with you. It's a little different. People take it, it's a different approach, and people seem to understand that for the most part as well. So it's those key things really. But and like you said, there's no reason why sort of what we're offering from a pro bono level can't work for both, in my opinion. Like you've rightly pointed out, because there are a lot of organizations right now who are, somewhat successful, but are operational, but are struggling to adapt to certain changes, whether that's because they want to make internal changes to product or to strategy, or because of external forces having an impact on them. And I do think that it's very difficult, especially if everyone's nervous about losing their job, right? This is another big thing. Like you just pointed out there about people wanting to say no, or people not wanting to say no. Like, we're in a climate right now where your employees of your business are very unlikely to tell you what you need to hear, because if your business is struggling, they're not going to want to put themselves on the chopping block. Whereas people like you and I, we don't give a shit. right? We'll find another. If you don't like what you hear and you get rid of us and you sack us, we'll find another gig. It's not the end of the world. But we're going to tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. You know, back to that saying again. And I think that for a lot of the leaders I work with, and I'd imagine this is similar for you, that's refreshing. That's very refreshing, and not just from the perspective of the CEO or the board of directors, but even my counterpart. You know, the CEO in post, or the CRO or CTO in post. That's actually refreshing for them, because I can sometimes be the conduit of which, you know, they can sort of talk, you know, through me sometimes, and say the things that they've been maybe worried to say or scared to say because of their job might be objective. So I can take that hit for them sometimes, or the hit for the sales team or the marketing team or the customer success team. I can speak their minds for them. Without putting anyone under fire or throwing them under the bus. So that's really important for those sort of businesses. But the big one for me is, as well as all of that, like I said, is at risk of repeating myself, but I think it's really important, is this idea. I just can't help but thinking that there is an Elon Musk, there is a fucking Jeff Bezos sat somewhere in their one bed apartment, struggling to make ends meet, working 60 hours a week, who has a fucking amazing business idea, and they've just got no idea how to take that first step. And for me, that is soul crushing. And all of the information that they see online tells them that they need to raise investment, or that they need to speak, hire advisors that cost £200-300 an hour. Like, that's all they're seeing. And for me, it's like, even if we can give them a free hour that just gives them some very practical tips and advice, and really importantly, next steps. Like, I never want to walk away from anything without a very clear sort of next couple of steps. Like, be on your way, you can do this stuff, then for me, that's like a really powerful thing to be able to do. I
think there's something in there about that finding the next Elon Musk. It's a bit, it's kind of grandiose in some ways, but it is that, again, that idea that there are lots of people who want to make sure that there are entry barriers are removed to going out there and being successful. And we all like an underdog story. And yeah, I think it's just, for me, it's also like more refreshing to work with people with those levels of energy and ideas for what they want to do, even if that can also be frustrating in different ways. When you're in a big corporate world, there's so many million reasons why you can't do stuff, which is nothing to do with the product or nothing to do with, the business. It's just like red tape, politics, all this sort of stuff. And so I really like the idea of trying to be able to help people who, kind of need a bit of a help, need a help up. And, obviously there's only so much of our time we can give away for it, but I think we can give away some.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the idea, and of course, there's a selfish reason to it too. It gets our names out there, it gets us in front of people, and hopefully they're successful, and hopefully that pays dividends to some respect, maybe even literally someday. Who knows? That there is that element to it. Altruism is never for truly altruism's sake, but that example I gave of like that guy just sat in like a one bed apartment sort of somewhere, struggling to make ends meet. Actually, more commonly, the areas the situations people find themselves in which are most constraining to the idea of being able to start their own business are those that have a fairly well-paying job, but they have a family. And they have people depending on them, and taking a risk just isn't an option. They can't just quit their job, and they might have some decent amount of savings that can last them 6 months, or 12 months or something. But they're nervous and they don't want to do it because of they know that there's a very high chance they could fail. So it's that kind of stuff that actually is more often than not the types of people I speak to on that end of the scale, not including the other end, which is more sort of speaking to executive teams and so on. And that's the one which is like, well, you've got they feel like there's a ticking clock element there. Like, if they don't do it now, they're never going to do it, and they want to provide their family with a better life and all that kind of stuff. I think if you're young and if you're single and you don't have a family, it's kind of like, take all the fucking risks you want, right? But like, and I can totally understand that particular situation of maybe being in a relationship or being a homeowner or having a family and just being fed up with the grind and wanting to provide your family with a better life, but knowing how to navigate that, especially around an existing job, without them sometimes catching wind of what you're doing too. Like, that there's a whole level of complexity there that people want advice on how to navigate, which is very commonly what I help people with. So yeah, that's an interesting one as well.
Sure, it's a nice sort of rounding off of the type of people that we want to work with and want to help. And I really do feel like they are, markets that are untapped in some ways, and not just from the opportunity that we have, but just if we think about the history of building things, outside of or even like Elon Musk web, it wasn't like he was poor. It wasn't like he didn't have great opportunities in terms of where he was and the people that he was around. So I really believe that if we're going to survive as a species, if you like, and it's a bit of a dramatic intro to that, but I really do believe that there's an element of we have to maximize human creation. We have to maximize what individuals and collections of individuals with aligned motivations can achieve. And quite importantly, I think this model, this big corporate model, where you're just an employee, I think it's going to die. I think it's certainly on its way out. And I think that we have to move towards a mentality where almost, everybody is either their self-employed contractor, or everybody is getting a share of the business. And I see a much more gig economy future where people are bouncing in between a number of different contracts, or they've got a startup of their own and they're helping their mate startup and they've got equity in it. I just think that is the natural avenue of sort of decentralization. We've got too centralized in so many ways, and our economies around the world and our governments, it's clear things are failing, and they're failing at the point of centralization. And I see what we're doing here. It's aligned to some of my more political and ideological leanings of that decentralization. Find a way to give more people opportunities to take their ideas forward, give them the tools and the knowledge and the support to be able to do that without being like, you need 100 grand. Because there are ways you can make it happen without having that big huge amount of money. But I guess also for me as well, like there's really been an element of learning through all this that I want to do and I want to continue to do. Last year when I left the big corporate world, I found I really wanted to work in startups. I had built a startup consultancy, or helped build a startup consultancy that worked for big corporates. So it was kind of, I have some startup experience and growing a team and all that, but not like a tech SaaS startup. And I really found it difficult to find roles that certainly gave me the level of responsibility. I felt that my experience as an engineer, as a leader in that space for a long time, warranted. And a lot of the pushback was about lack of startup experience, relatively. And what I started to do, kind of accidentally fell into this somewhat, was like, well, I need to get more experience with the more kind of bleeding edge tools, with the tools that are being used on the ground in startups rather than the big corporation tools. I want more experience in the startup world in general. I can still help people. I can still help people with their tech planning, with their ideas, with delivering an MVP, building something for them. But the motivation for me is also because I do want to build my own thing. I want to be captain of my own ship in some way as well. And to do that, I need more experience. I need more knowledge. I need to see 1,000 startup ideas. I want to see 1,000 things go wrong. I want to see what's working for people. And so there's that huge selfish element to me as well, that I'm trying to make myself a more capable person by giving away my time to speak to more people who are in various phases of this, but ultimately are going to give me more data points to lean on to make myself more successful when the time is right, if you like, for me to have my own thing. Which is not that there is a specific mentality right now. Otherwise, maybe we should be talking about it. But there's not a specific idea. There is a notion that I want to build something great. I want to change the world in some way. I'm not sure exactly what that is. In the meantime, I'm going to go out there and try and, as I've always done in my career, just learn as much as I can about something.
Yeah,
and so that's a big motivation these days.
Yeah, and that's a great mindset to have, and one that I absolutely share. every individual I work with, every client I have, every contract I've ever had, there's always something that can be learned from it. It goes back to what you said about being a Robin in the situation. It means that yes, you are there as a supporting party, and yes, you bring a certain amount of experience with you that is obviously valuable to the people you're working with, but you're always going to be taking something away from it so that you can bring it to the next person, for sure. There's one thing you made me think of as well, very briefly there, just before we wrap it up, as well, which is this idea of talking about skill sets and learning and all that sort of thing. And then you mentioned about sort of working in startups to gain that experience. That there have been a few occasions as well where I've said to certain people, not just, your idea is shit, don't bother, which, it has happened once or twice, I'll be honest, like where I've not said it like that, obviously, but for being in the interest of people's well-being financially and otherwise, like, I couldn't in good conscience tell them to continue to pursue an idea that I believed could potentially ruin them, right? So there's almost an ethical responsibility I had at these certain points. So I've said that. But there's also been other situations where it's been very clear to me that the individual in front of me doesn't have what I believe is required in order to become an effective CEO. And so the advice has usually been one of two things. It's either been, this is a great idea, but put it on pause, find a job in a startup, get some experience and come back to it. Or it is actually, I'll step in as your fractional CEO, and you should look at hiring a CEO in future, and you should take another executive role, as a co-founder with that person. And that's happened on a couple of occasions, not very often, but again, not worded as black and white as that, but through discovery and working with them over a period of time, realizing and them coming to realize that actually, usually it's through their own recognition, actually, that they lack certain skill sets or the fortitudes or whatever in certain things that would enable them to lead the company for whatever reason now, and to either take a step back and go and gain experience in an existing organization, or to actually just realize this, I'm not the leader that I need for this to see this through. And that, I think, takes a huge amount of courage to recognize, and a huge amount of self-reflection. And then, and there has been a couple of times, like I said, where I've acted as almost like interim CEO, fractional CEO, instead of CCO, and then help them actually bring in a CEO later on. Done that a couple of times, and it's a very interesting process. So that's why I put that out
just
there.
Imagine that as a closing point on that, to wrap it up, maybe wrap up the podcast, is just imagine how many great ideas there are out there with founders who have lots of passion, lots of energy, lots of skill that don't go anywhere because of either that founder's fears or because of that founder's inability to do some of the necessary steps, like be the CEO, when actually, and I think this is probably the case for a lot of like tech ideas, a lot of tech people that bump into, that they have all the energy, they have the great ideas, they can go out and they deliver on all this, they just don't have the skill set to be CEO. And that either stops them because they know it, and they know they don't have that skill set, and they know there's all these things they don't want to do. Like, I don't want to be a CEO. I don't want to do those things. I want to be in all those board meetings.
Hello?
And they
Nope, I lost you for a second.
I was just saying that they either know that they don't have the skills, or they don't want to do the certain things that is required of a CEO, and it stops them from doing anything, or they don't know it, and they just don't make the progress. They don't get the traction on these what could be great ideas, because they're just not aware of it. They're not aware of that failing they have in themselves. And I do think that is where we can be the fractionals that they need, not the fractionals they want. Is a real opportunity for us there, and for these people, to make sure we don't leave stones unturned in terms of.
And that's exactly why I tend to describe myself more these days as an advisor/coach, because actually there's a coaching element there that I think is really important to being able to be successful as an advisor or a fractional, which is actually working with a leader, whatever team they are, especially a CEO. To be as introspective as possible, and to create exercises and processes in working with them to continuously be introspective, and to continuously be sort of somewhat just reflective of the way that they are, the way they practice, especially for earlier stage founders. Because otherwise, the implementation of whatever is being recommended from me is null and void if they don't have the skill set in order to go out and execute it, or the motivation to execute it. So that's why that's more what I've very recently sort of started to describe myself more as an advisor, commercial advisor / coach. Or executive coach, rather than actually moving away from the fractional term more and more, just because if I feel like that feels like a more holistic approach to helping founders specifically. But I don't know, I could be wrong. I to and fro on that.
I think that's it. It's the old cliche, teach a man to fish, give a man a fish to eat for a day. And so I think we're in the business of also, teaching people to fish a little bit. And I think that is a useful point you've made there, and it's coaching to an extent, but it's not just coaching. It's not just like, I need a coach to help me. And there's this distinction between what a consultant does and what just a coach does. And I think it is this sort of almost operational balance between those two things. It's combining those things in an operational and action-based sense, rather than just one or the other.
Yeah, we need a new word for it, really, I think, because it feels like you and I work very similarly in that, which is what we already know, which is why we've agreed to work together, in that we sort of seem to wear the consultant, the fractional, the coaching, the advisor hat when we understand it to be necessary, and as long as it adds the most value and propels the direction of the company the most. Like we recognize that and put the right hat on when appropriate. And so it's there maybe needs to be a better word that we need to come up with specifically for that. We create a new position.
It's going to call it Robin. Be your Robin.
Yeah, Robin. Yeah. All the Dark
Knight. A technical Robin.
Yeah. Or the Dark Knight or something like that. Yeah. The Harvey Dent or something.
Maybe.
All right, man. Well, look, it was good catching up with you. But yeah. We've got a pro bono session.
Next 10 minutes. I'm going to be on when you meet again.
Yeah, so I'm going to grab a coffee, and that's our first one since offering this. So
3:20 p.m. coffee. Dangerous man.
Well, I drink decaf, so
okay.
Yeah. So I'm okay. But it has some weird placebo effect on me. So I'm just going to keep going with it. I'm not going to question it. It seems to give me more energy. I'm not going to think about it too much, otherwise it will stop working. So
Good man. All right, I'll catch you in 10 then.
All right, see you in 10. Bye.
Ciao, buddy. Bye.